I'm sorry, but you can't stay here anymore. My sister's words hit me like a punch to the gut. Standing in the middle of her spotless living room, I froze. The weight of her ultimatum hung in the air between us, sharp and suffocating. Her eyes darted toward the tattoo peeking out from the sleeve of my jacket, as if it were some toxic symbol contaminating her perfect life. I won't have my kids exposed to that. That. She couldn't even say the word. My tattoo, my choice, my life. And now it was the reason I was being cast out. Hi everyone. Welcome back to Ember Stories. Today, I have a heartfelt story to share with you. Get ready to feel all the emotions. I moved in with my sister Lydia 6 months ago after I lost my job. It was not supposed to be a permanent arrangement, just until I got back on my feet. In the beginning, things were relatively smooth. We had a history of sibling arguments, but we kept things civil for the sake of her 2 children, Ethan and Sophie. Lydia's husband was frequently out of town for work, so I took on household responsibilities whenever I could. I would pick the kids up from school, fix things around the house, and cook dinner a few nights each week. The kids adored me. Ethan, a curious 10-year-old with an insatiable appetite for asking questions, thought my tattoo was fascinating. I always made sure to keep it covered when Lydia was around. Sophie, at 7, was more reserved, but always ran to greet me at the door and clung to my leg. Despite all the help I gave, Lydia always seemed tense around me. Her gaze often drifted to my arm, where she knew the tattoo was hidden beneath the sleeve of my jacket. It was as though the ink was some kind of stain that she feared might taint her children. It was just one tattoo, a black and white hawk with its wings stretched wide, inked on my right forearm. For me, it symbolized freedom and resilience. It served as a reminder that no matter how tough life became, I could always rise above it. Apparently, Lydia did not see it that way. That morning, Ethan had returned home from school with a drawing in hand, a rough sketch of a bird in flight. I drew this because Uncle Jamie has a cool tattoo, he said proudly, holding up the paper for everyone to see. Lydia's expression immediately hardened. That is enough, Ethan, she said firmly, snatching the paper from his hands. Go wash up for dinner. Later that evening, while the kids were playing upstairs, Lydia confronted me in the living room. You are setting a bad example, Jamie. You know I do not want my children exposed to things like that. Things like what? I asked, already feeling frustrated. It is just a tattoo. It is not just about the tattoo. It is about respect and values. I am trying to raise them with the right mindset. And you think I am going to ruin that? Her silence was all the answer I needed. Now, as she stood before me, arms crossed and face hard as stone, it was clear that she had made up her mind. You need to find somewhere else to live by the weekend, she said in a final, clipped tone. I looked around the house, this place I had tried to make a temporary home, and realized there was no room for argument. I just never expected her to be the one to cast me out. The weekend approached far too quickly. Each hour felt like a countdown to my departure, and the atmosphere in the house remained tense. By Saturday afternoon, I had packed most of my belongings into 2 duffel bags. Lydia had not spoken to me since that night, and the silence between us felt heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. I spent the afternoon in my small guest room, sorting through the few things I had accumulated during my stay. Every item carried memories of the last 6 months. Memories of helping Ethan with his school projects, baking cookies with Sophie, and even the occasional movie night with Lydia when things had not been so strained. Around sunset, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The cool evening air was refreshing, but it did little to ease the turmoil inside me. My feet led me to the neighborhood park, a familiar spot where I had often taken Ethan and Sophie to play. I sat down on a bench, staring out at the empty swings that swayed gently in the breeze. I was lost in thought when a small voice broke through my reverie. Uncle Jamie? I turned to see Ethan standing a few feet away, wearing his pajamas and holding a flashlight. His eyes were wide with concern. You must have followed me without anyone noticing. Ethan, what are you doing out here? I asked, surprised. I heard Mom talking earlier. She said you have to leave. Are you really going? He asked, his voice trembling. I sighed, unsure how to explain the complexities of adult conflicts to a 10-year-old. I do not know yet, buddy. Your mom and I have some disagreements. And sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. But no matter what happens, I am always here for you and Sophie. But it is not fair, Ethan said, his voice cracking. I like having you here. And I like your tattoo too. It is cool. I managed a small smile despite the ache in my chest. I am glad you think so. But sometimes people see things differently, and we have to respect that. He did not seem convinced, but he nodded anyway. Can I see it again? I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the black and white hawk. Ethan traced the outline of the wings with his finger. Why did you get it? He asked. It reminds me to stay strong and free, I explained. No matter what life throws at me, I can always rise above it. We sat in silence for a while, the night air growing colder. Eventually I stood up. Come on, let us get you back home before your mom notices you are gone. Ethan reluctantly followed me back to the house, his small footsteps echoing against the pavement. When we arrived, Lydia was waiting at the door, arms crossed and eyes blazing with anger. I should have known, she said sharply. Ethan, go to bed. Now. Ethan hesitated, glancing at me before trudging up the stairs. Once he was out of earshot, Lydia turned on me. This is exactly why you need to leave, she said. You are already undermining me. I did not ask him to follow me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He was upset. I just talked to him. That is the problem, Jamie. You are always justifying everything. My children do not need that kind of influence. Influence? I snapped. You act like I am a bad person because of one tattoo. Do you even hear yourself? Her eyes softened for a moment, but then the walls went up again. You have until Sunday, she said quietly before walking away. The next morning, I was packing up the last of my things when Sophie appeared in the doorway. She held her stuffed bear tightly, tears streaming down her face. Uncle Jamie, please do not go, she whispered. I knelt down and hugged her. I do not want to go either, Sophie. But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and we need time to figure things out. Mom is making a mistake, she said fiercely. Before I could respond, Ethan came bounding down the stairs. We have an idea, he announced. What idea? I asked, curious. Come with us, he said, grabbing my hand. Sophie took my other hand, and they led me into the living room. Lydia was sitting on the couch, her face pale with exhaustion. Mom, we need to talk, Ethan said firmly. Lydia looked surprised but nodded. Okay, what is this about? We do not want Uncle Jamie to leave, Ethan said. He helps us. He listens to us. And he is not a bad person just because of a tattoo. Sophie chimed in. We love him. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of guilt and sorrow. I am scared, Jamie. I want to protect them from anything that could hurt them. But I do not know how to let go of this fear. Lydia, getting a tattoo was never about rebelling. It was about finding strength when I needed it most. I would never want to set a bad example for your children. I just want them to know that life is about learning who you are and staying true to that. For a long moment, Lydia said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. I do not want to lose you, Jamie. I am sorry. I should have talked to you instead of pushing you away. Relief flooded through me. Apology accepted. Ethan and Sophie threw their arms around both of us. And for the first time in days, the tension lifted. We were a family again, piecing ourselves back together one step at a time. The next morning, there was a sense of fragile peace in the house, but I knew things were not fully resolved. Lydia was still grappling with her own fears and concerns, and I felt the weight of needing to prove that I was not a threat to the values she wanted for her children. We sat down for breakfast, an unusual quietness hanging in the air. The kids seemed hopeful, glancing between us with expectant eyes. Finally, Lydia cleared her throat. Jamie, I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, she began, her gaze fixed on her coffee cup. I've always tried to be the perfect parent, but maybe that means I've been too rigid. I'm afraid of losing control over the things that matter most. You are a great parent, Lydia, but control and trust are not the same thing, I said gently. I never wanted to challenge your authority. I just wanted to be here for Ethan and Sophie. Before Lydia could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. We all exchanged glances and I got up to answer it. Standing on the porch was Mr. Hayes, the kid's elderly neighbor who often watched them play outside. "Good morning, Jamie," he said with a friendly smile. "Sorry to bother you so early, but I wanted to return something Ethan left at my house." He held up a sketchbook, Ethan's favorite place to draw. Ethan rushed to the door. "Thanks, Mr. Hayes," he said eagerly. Mr. Hayes nodded, then glanced at my arm. "That's a fine piece of artwork you've got there," he said, pointing to my tattoo. "Did you know Ethan drew something similar the other day?" He said it reminded him of being strong and free. Lydia froze at the words. Her eyes widened as she looked at Ethan, who had turned pink with embarrassment. "Is that true?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "I just thought it was cool. And when I drew it, I felt brave. Like I could handle anything." There was a long silence as Lydia processed what he had said. I could see the conflict playing out in her eyes. On one hand, she was still wary of anything that could influence her kids. But on the other, she could not ignore the genuine sense of empowerment her son had found through something so simple. "Ethan, do you know why I was worried about Uncle Jamie's tattoo?" Lydia finally asked. "Because you thought it might make us do bad things." Ethan guessed. "Not exactly. I was afraid you'd see it and think that you had to grow up too fast. Or that life was all about making bold, risky choices," she explained. "But maybe I was wrong to think that way." Sophie spoke up, her small voice filled with determination. "Uncle Jamie's tattoo is about being strong. And we all want to be strong, don't we?" Lydia's face softened. She knelt down in front of the kids. "You're right. Being strong is important. And so is understanding what things mean before we judge them. I'm sorry if I made either of you feel like you couldn't admire Uncle Jamie." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Lydia stood up and faced me, her eyes brimming with apology and acceptance. "I've been holding on to fear for a long time, Jamie," she said. "But I don't want to let it drive a wedge between us anymore. I want us to move forward as a family." "That means everything to me, Lydia," I replied. We embraced, and the kids cheered as if we had just won some great victory. The air felt lighter. The tension dissipated as quickly as it had come. Lydia and I still had work to do to rebuild trust, but we were finally on the right path. Later that afternoon, Ethan approached me with his sketchbook. "Will you help me draw another hawk?" he asked eagerly. I smiled. "Of course. Let's do it together." And as we sat side by side, sketching wings and feathers in intricate detail, I felt a sense of peace. This was family, messy and perfect, but bound by love and understanding. And no tattoo, no matter how misunderstood, could ever change that. In the days that followed, a new sense of harmony settled over the house. The past week had been a whirlwind of emotions, but we had come through it with a deeper understanding of one another. Lydia and I began talking more openly, something we had not done in years. Over cups of tea late at night, we shared stories from our childhood, reflected on our parents' lessons, and acknowledged how we had both changed over time. Lydia admitted that she had been holding on to old fears and insecurities, trying too hard to control every detail of her children's lives. "I want to be the kind of parent who listens," she said one night, "and the kind of sister who trusts." "You already are," I reassured her. Ethan and Sophie, too, seemed lighter and more at ease. They no longer tiptoed around conversations about tattoos or other topics Lydia had once deemed off-limits. One afternoon, Sophie proudly showed me her drawing of a family of hawks, each bird soaring together beneath a bright sun. "This is us," she explained. "We all stay together and help each other fly." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes as I hugged her. "That's exactly right, Sophie." Sunday morning came, and I had packed my bags again. But this time it was not out of necessity, it was out of choice. Lydia and I had agreed that it was time for me to move back to my apartment, though the door to her house would always be open. "You'll still visit all the time, right?" Ethan asked, clinging to me tightly. "Of course," I promised. "Every weekend if you'll have me." "Deal," he said, grinning. Lydia walked me to the door, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension between us. Just love, trust, and a shared hope for the future. "Take care of yourself, Jamie," she said, giving me a warm hug. "And don't forget your family. Always." As I stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the neighborhood. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. We were stronger together. And that made all the difference.